I worry about a lot of things when it comes to my health.
As a 30-year-old woman, you do start to think about fertility and things around that.
My skin mostly.
Staying fit.
A health issue that I worry about is my monthly. It's something that I feel really uncomfortable talking about with anyone, including my doctor.
Not being able to look after myself.
Cardiovascular, I think. We have a family history.
My health would be probably menopause.
Skin cancer, living in Australia, being outdoors quite a lot, I worry about that.
Just like common colds and stuff like that. Myth out there about metabolism just completely drops when you turn 30. I want to know if that's true.
What I worry about is I'm approaching to 50 years old, so I start worrying about my menopause.
I spend most of my time worrying about mental health. I really think that there's no good health without good mental health.
Frustrating that you can't do what you used to do.
I worry about having too much information.
Cervical cancer, it's something that really does worry me. It's something I've had an issue with before.
I don't know what's relevant for me.
And then when I'm 40, there might be some new worries.
Welcome to this special section of video presentations. To help support your event, we have prepared 3 short videos. You will hear from Dr. Deirdre Bentley on how to get the best out of your appointment with your doctor. You will also hear from Dr. Sonia Davison about heart health and also how to recognise the symptoms of heart attack in women. And I will give you some tips on good mental and emotional health. In total, the videos take around 30 minutes, but you are more than welcome to watch just 1 or 2 of the videos, to stop the videos and perhaps discuss amongst yourselves. So sit back, relax and enjoy our very special video presentations for Women's Health Week 2015.
Hi, I'm Deirdre Bentley, a GP at Jean Hales, and I'm here today to talk to you about health checks. So what are the important conditions that are affecting women's health today? There's heart disease, bowel cancer, breast cancer, lung cancer and osteoporosis. And for all of these things we have health checks and screening tests available. Things for breast checks, pap tests, bone health and heart health checkups and also a general medical checkup. So keeping a check on your health is really important, and that's why we do these screenings and health check, because then they can prevent disease and illness. And for each individual person, there's different needs as to what tests might be required. And these depend on your individual risks, your age, your family history, and your own medical background. So a GP is the person who does those health checks. And why have them? Well, as we said, you check on your current health status, it tries to reduce the risk of further health problems, it gives you an opportunity to gain information and also for treatment if necessary. What does a checkup involve? Well, it involves taking a medical history, involves a blood pressure check, some blood tests, in particular a fasting blood glucose for diabetes and a cholesterol check, and other tests that may be necessary, including a bone density scan. It's important for one thing that you can do is to know your numbers, and these numbers are blood pressure, your cholesterol and your blood glucose. And then once you know those numbers and understand what they mean, to talk to your health professional about them and develop a plan as to what action you can take towards helping. The way to have a good appointment is, first of all, be prepared. Be prepared by making a list and prioritising that list so that you're not leaving that really burning question until you're just about to walk out the door. Bring with you a list of the medications that you're on at the moment and that you've recently been on, as well as a list of the conditions and illnesses and hospitalisations, including surgeries that you might have had in the past, as well as know your family history, because they'll ask you about that. And the important things in family history are things that might have happened at an early age in the family, things like cancers, strokes, heart disease, liver disease, blood clots. So they're some of the important conditions. Do your homework before you get to the appointment, and this homework can be things about reading up about things that you might think that you have, but always importantly go to the good websites such as Jean Hales for that information. And then before you leave your doctor's surgery, have a plan, a written plan either by your GP or one that you've written down yourself. When it comes to having those difficult conversations with your health professional about some of the things that might have been found in that checkup, it's important to have found the right health professional, and the good way to do that is from personal recommendations. Then ask the questions that you would like to ask. It's important that when you're having those difficult conversations to make sure that you've got some privacy, so leave any distractions such as toddlers at home for the day. So one of the difficult questions that comes up is, do I have cancer? How do I know I have cancer, and what can we do about it? Well, in answer to how do you know is you don't know and we don't know. That's why we go through the history taking, the examination, and then doing some tests that might lead us down the path to suspect that there might be a problem. And what do you do when you think you have cancer? Well, it's actually what you don't do that's more important. You don't go onto Dr. Google, because you'll get some terrible information on there, and you don't put your head in the sand. What you do is make an appointment, have that conversation, and be persistent about getting the answers to the questions that you're worrying about. What else might you go to your GP for in this context? Well, it's something that happens out of the ordinary for you. That's when you need the symptom to go and have the checkup, and when you're worried about something else that's happening. So once you've had those health checks and screening tests, what now? Decide on what you can achieve to make those changes that you need to make. Small steps are achievable, and once you've made those steps and made those changes, reward yourself and celebrate for those achievements.
Hi, I'm Dr. Sonia Davison. I'm an endocrinologist. That's a physician who specialises in hormones. Today we're talking about heart disease, particularly in women. In Australia today, we're less fit, we're less active, and statistics show that we're actually getting heavier. When we're looking at Australian women, we're gaining weight, and that's particularly around the waist, which is a risk factor for heart disease. Many of us are skipping meals, we're not having enough calcium, and many of us are having increased levels of blood pressure, cholesterol, and are having an increased level also of diabetes, all of which are risk factors for heart disease. Each stage in a woman's life is a good time to reassess health. For example, younger women in their 20s and 30s might be looking at things like contraception or fertility. Older women around the age of 50, this is a good time to look at their health for future years in terms of them having possibly menopausal symptoms, so it's a good time to discuss these with your doctor at that stage. For older women again, they might be looking at things like bone health and also brain health. In terms of heart disease in women in Australia, women might not perceive that they are at risk of heart disease, but there is a real big increase in heart disease risk after menopause. Those women with an early menopause, so that's menopause before the age of 45 years, are particularly at risk if they haven't been treated. At least 3/4 of women over the age of 18 have at least one controllable risk factor for heart disease, and these can be pretty easily addressed. Those factors that are important are diet, exercise, smoking, and avoiding obesity. When we're looking at heart disease in women, women are really frightened about breast cancer, and breast cancer is terribly frightening, but women don't tend to die of breast cancer as much as they do from heart disease. So heart disease is much more prevalent, and women are actually 4 times more likely to die of heart disease than they are of breast cancer. When we look at statistics for causes of death in Australian women, 1/3 of Australian women will die of heart disease, and a lesser percentage of stroke, about 17%. But when you're looking at breast cancer, 4% of women every year will die of breast cancer. So heart disease is a really big killer of Australian women. Heart disease tends to differ between men and women because it's typically been thought of as a male disease. So we're not as good at screening women, and that means trying to detect heart disease in women. When we're looking at women, most doctors also, it'll not be the first thing on their radar in terms of their health. Counselling, risk perception, and all of these things in terms of looking at heart disease and health in women tend to be less of an issue. Treatment is less intensive and aggressive. Women tend to present later, and their symptoms can be different, and the outcome can be poorer. When we're looking at heart disease, many people don't understand what's actually going on, but it's essentially clogging of pipes. Those pipes are going to the heart, and the heart needs to have nice, healthy blood flow so it can function and make all the blood go to the rest of the body. So what happens with heart disease is called atherosclerosis. This is when the arteries of the heart become clogged up with a gummy substance that contains cholesterol, and this can narrow, and a heart attack is when that blood flow totally closes over because the pipe is definitely clogged. And this can lead to a heart attack, and that can be a problem because the rest of the body won't receive the blood flow it needs. In terms of looking at risk factors for heart disease, yes, it's very easy to see if you're at risk of heart disease. So for example, a family history of heart disease, especially in people who are close to you, such as brothers, fathers, etc., and especially at an early age. Those who are smokers, they are at higher risk of heart disease. Those with blood pressure, diabetes, those who are overweight, and particularly if you have an increased weight around the tummy. Those who don't exercise very often, and also those who are socially isolated, live alone and may have depression, they're at increased risk of heart disease. So we can all do something to lower our risk of heart disease, and even one small change can make a big positive impact on your health. So increasing your exercise and making exercise part of your regular routine, reducing or stopping smoking, looking at your diet, increasing more fibre and reducing saturated fats, and losing weight if you're overweight. Getting involved with the community if you might be a little bit socially isolated. And the other important thing is to have a health assessment with your GP or health practitioner, talking about your risks of heart disease, having your blood pressure, cholesterol, blood glucose measured, and just opening the conversation. In terms of symptoms of a heart attack, it's very important to recognise what may be a heart attack. And heart attack symptoms or heart pain symptoms can differ in different women and between different episodes of heart pain. So typically heart pain has been described as an intense, dull pressure in the centre or to the left of the chest. It won't typically be a sharp pain, but it can just be a discomfort. This pain can go to the arm, particularly the left arm, and to the left hand. It can go to the neck and also the jaw. Women can feel nauseated or just lightheaded and dizzy and not quite right. And some people will feel that they're about to die. Some women will also have shortness of breath. It's important to have any of these symptoms looked at. Even if you think, oh, it's not a heart attack, much safer to go to your doctor, be assessed, and then your heart disease risk is minimised. In terms of some final messages for overall health, we can all do something to increase our health. So looking at diet is very important. Having a low-fat, high-fibre diet with an adequate amount of calcium is very important. So having 2 to 3 serves of dairy a day is very important for bones and for health, also for heart as well. In terms of vitamin D, that depends on where you live and your sun exposure, but a supplement is readily available, and you can also have levels pretty easily checked by your doctor. We all need to be doing some exercise, and ideally that would be on a daily basis and about 30 minutes of moderate to high intensity exercise. We can't all do that, but even if you can't do much, just increasing your incidental exercise would be great, but aiming for about a 30-minute walk 3 to 4 times a week and doing a mix of things such as weight bearing, strength training, etc. We need to have our blood pressure checked, our blood glucose. We need to be fit and active and involved in the community somehow. And if we're not, we really need to get some help. So ask your GP because they can be a great source of advice for all of these things.
Hi, I'm Mandy Deeks. I'm a psychologist and I head up the Translation, Education and Communications Unit at Jean Hales. And I would like to talk with you about mental and emotional health, a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. It's actually a really important topic for all Australian women. We know that over their lifetime, 45% of Australians, that's men and women, will experience some kind of mood disorder. 7% of women will experience depression in any given year, And interestingly, and I think quite alarmingly, 18% of women will experience a clinical anxiety disorder. I'm going to talk a little bit more about what depression and anxiety is as we move through the presentation, and then I'll talk about what you can actually do. I think the other thing that's really important is that stress impacts on our life, and we know that stress is increasing significantly for women. About 19% of women would say that stress significantly affects their physical life, and 24% would say it affects their mental health. This is important because if your mental health is compromised, it's really hard to make good decisions about your health. So, what influences mental health? One of the big ones is your attitude. If you have a negative attitude, if you think in very black and white terms, if something is either really, really bad or really, really good, there's no grey area, and that can make things a bit difficult. If you jump to conclusions, if you think, oh my goodness, the worst possible thing is going to happen. Other things that influence our mental health include our personality, our family history, what our family life was like when we were growing up, what our roles are. Do we actually feel satisfied with the roles that we have? And also things like stress and the domino effect of life, the things that kind of unpack and roll over. One thing might be okay and we can cope, and then another thing happens and another thing happens. We also know that our physical lifestyle affects our mental health. So if we're not exercising, if we're not eating properly, those things can also affect us. One of the things that I find really important when I talk with clients is we tend to swallow things. If you swallow things like anger, frustration, hopelessness and helplessness, it has to go somewhere. So what happens to it? And sometimes you end up with feeling sadder, and that can lead to depression. Sometimes you worry a lot, and that can lead to anxiety. So swallowing things and internalizing things is not really good for our mental health. If we were looking for someone who was depressed, we would consider a number of different physical and emotional symptoms. So it might be things like, are you eating the same way? Are you either not eating because you're so churned up, or you're eating a lot because you're doing a lot of comfort eating? Are you sleeping? Do you have a sense of feeling restless or slowed down? And sometimes people will talk of a fog or an inability to concentrate or think. And then when we get to the more serious side of things, some women start to think about, is this really worth it? And thoughts of death and suicide can start to creep in. Think about you and the kinds of physical and emotional symptoms that you might be experiencing. When it comes to anxiety, there are also things you can look for. There might be the physical symptoms, and common physical symptoms with anxiety include things like a racing heart or fast breathing or a churned up tummy, and you don't feel as in control perhaps as you used to be. Then there is the thinking as well. So you might actually be more worried than you usually are. You might sort of think the worst possible thing that could go wrong will go wrong. And then there are the behaviours. We know that if you are anxious, it's much better if you think, oh, I just won't go there, because then you won't have the anxiety type reaction. In actual fact, that is the worst thing that you can do, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. What about stress? We hear stress talked about a lot. You know, everybody's stressed. Oh, I feel so stressed. There's the busyness of life. What do you actually look for when you're thinking about, am I stressed? And I think there are a couple of key things. Do I feel as in control as I used to? Do I feel overloaded? Am I more grumpy, irritable? It's not a significant symptom that will actually affect my day-to-day living, but I just feel churned up and not able to cope as much as I used to. And I think the other thing we might start to feel are more headaches, a kind of tightening of the muscles, but it's not to that point where you might be significantly anxious. So the good news is there are lots and lots of things that you can do. If you're feeling anxious, if you're feeling depressed, if you're feeling stressed. One of the things that you could start with is actually understanding you. How do you normally react to things? How do you think in certain situations? Do you jump to conclusions or think more negatively? What about the people that are in your life? Do you actually have people who tend to suck the goodness out of you? Or, you leave sometimes talking with someone and you feel drained and you feel exhausted and they feel uplifted because you've made things okay for them. Think about those kinds of things, and also your physical lifestyle. Are you eating properly? Are you exercising? Are you resting? Is there time for you? So what can you do? Understand how you normally cope. Are those coping skills working? Sometimes coping might be going for a walk, or it might be grabbing the telephone and calling a friend, or it might just be having some time to yourself. Are those coping skills working? What about understanding that life is actually around transitions? Life is full of a lot of change, and sometimes we feel we might not be able to control that change. Think about the times in your life where there have been transitions, where there's been a major event, or you've changed jobs, or you've moved house, or there's been a new baby. Those kinds of things in life can really impact on our mental and emotional health. How did you cope during those times, and how might you cope now? The other thing I think is important is not ignoring sadness. Sometimes we think, it'll be okay, or I'll just keep going. But if you are starting to feel sad or anxious, do something about it. Don't wait until it starts to really impact on your daily life. And I think the other thing, when I mentioned internalizing or swallowing things like anger, if you're angry about something, maybe just have a chat with someone or write down a few notes, but get it out somehow. Some really practical tips: grab a diary or just an exercise book and write down some things that might be your trigger points. What sets you off? What has changed in the past little while? What were your coping skills? Write them down. Connecting with others, we know that actually connecting with people and having emotional support is one of the biggest things that can help our mental and emotional health. Face the fear. I mentioned before that sometimes when we're anxious, we tend to run away. The best possible thing you can do, as hard as it is, and I know it feels uncomfortable, is try and face the situation, because then you can turn around and say, I didn't actually feel all that comfortable, but I did it. And I know that I can do it. And if that is hard for you, then seek help. I think the other thing we need to do is put a bit of balance in our life. Saying no is not actually a bad thing. Try not to say yes to everything. Just have a moment where you go, you know what, I'll get back to you. I will do my best, but I may not be able to do it next week. What about the week after? So finally, get it out, externalize, whether that's talking, drawing, writing, walking, anything. Just getting those emotional feelings out is going to be really, really good for you. Go back to basics, eat properly, sleep as well as you can, and if you can't, do things that will help to improve your sleep. Exercise if you can, because we know that actually exercising a couple of times a week is just as good for you as taking an antidepressant, as long as you get those endorphins going. Imagine that you are your best friend. What advice would you give to your best friend? It's about you, and it's about taking time for you and actually nurturing you, because when you're okay, then everybody else in your life will be okay as well. Thank you so much for listening, and bye for now.
My elephant in the room is making sure that I have a pap test every 2 years.
My digestive health. I just never quite know what's going on down there.
It's something that I don't particularly enjoy, but I know is really important.
Social and health pressures. So at 20, you're able to just have fun and not think about, being too serious.
My elephant in the room is mental health.
Thinking that I can have a balanced life, I think I'm a complete fraud.
When you turn 30, it's sort of a reality check. You've got to start thinking, well, what do I need to think about now in terms of my health?
I'm happiest when I do acknowledge that you can't always balance your life and that it's okay to sometimes let some things go.
Probably anxiety, actually. Runs in the family. I know I have issues with it at times.
Having a Pap test every 2 years is really important as a woman, so I have to start talking about it, and then I'll be committed to every 2 years.